guys.
Give us a few.
Let me give.
I was going to say, give me part of yours for back here.
Thank you. Ooh, one page. Wow.
Yeah, just one page tonight.
Wow.
It'll take the whole time. Glad y'all are here, and we're gonna kind of pick up where we left off last week.
I think we're good.
Anybody need one? We do. So we got some back there.
Okay. How many more do y'all need? Three? Let's see, and everybody back there on the council.
Thank you.
I might
So,
give you two.
We'll open with prayer, and then we'll jump on into this, because I got a feeling that we'll may have some questions. Might not. I don't know. But let's open with prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time together. We ask you to be with us, and we ask you to be with our conversations and with our discussion, with our thoughts. Lord, open our minds and our hearts and our eyes to see what you would have us see, and to know and to believe that which is true. Lord, also be with those who are not here tonight, those who are sick, those who are recovering from procedures and surgeries, and those who face surgery, and those who have other and different illnesses. We ask that you bring your healing and your presence to them, and give them strength and peace to endure. We ask all of these in the strong name of Jesus. Amen. Bob, you praying? Oh, you're still yeah. You didn't okay.
My prayer was too late.
So what we talked about last week led to, and I appreciate this, because the way I wanted to teach this is much more involved than can be contained, obviously, like we learned last fall in a short course, because we didn't get through but a couple of chapters in 12 weeks last go round, and we only had 6 weeks in this go round, and I wanted to get finished. So I had questions that you all had asked on the very first night, and then I had some questions that came via email since last Wednesday night, and so I wanted to try to bring those to your attention and to try to sort of tie some of this together. So last week we were in chapter 20, because we were talking about the millennium and the tribulation and all of those kind of things. And we talked about the four different views or interpretations of what happens at that time, and they all have great similarities, but in all of them they have at least one striking difference. But the question came by the email, well, what about when does the Antichrist come on the scene? And those kind of things. So I thought tonight that we take a look at the Antichrist, or take a look at chapters 12 and 13, because they play into describing this. Now, again, I think you have to understand, or at least approach Revelation as being apocalyptic literature. So some of it is meant to be taken symbolically, and it was intentionally symbolic, because John wanted wanted to make sure that Christians who had to read this in secret and for fear of persecution would understand the symbolism. At the same time, the Romans and the Jews who were opposed to Christianity would not necessarily understand the symbolism and wouldn't know what in the world they were reading. So some of it is intentionally symbolic. Some of it is not symbolic. It's very literal. It's how we go about interpreting that makes some of the difference. So let's do this. Let's take a look. If you have your Bible, if you don't, I'll read it anyway. Let's take a look at chapter 12 of Revelation, and we'll kind of go from 12, 13. We might jump to 20. So I'm reading from the English Standard Version, and I'll stop at the highlights where I've got some of these things. By the way, this chapter 12 and 13 explains something that no matter what opinion you hold of the interpretation of the end, historical, pre-mill, dispensational pre-mill, post-mill, amill, these two chapters explain something called the unholy trinity, or some people call it the satanic trinity. I think unholy trinity is better because it's a mockery of the holy trinity. And so we're going to look at the three persons in this unholy trinity. All right, so chapter 12, verse 1. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant. Okay, so I'll stop there. So the woman is four different entities. And this is why literalism kind of falls apart here. I think I'll write it here just in case. Let me bring this closer to me. I think it'll roll. So the woman, first and foremost, is Eve. Then Israel. Then Mary. Then the church. All of these, two of them are actual females, but the nation of Israel and the church are both referred to in the feminine. So they're both referred to as women. So, understanding first that the child, first and foremost, is capital C child, Jesus, the Messiah. So the first prophecy of the Messiah is Genesis 3:15, where at the fall and the punishment from God, God tells Satan that the offspring of the woman will crush your head. You will strike his heel, but he will crush your head. So that's the first prophecy of Jesus. So this is one way to understand it. The other one is obviously Israel gave birth to the Messiah because Jesus is from the house and the lineage of David. And then Mary is obviously the mother of Jesus. But the church gives birth to Jesus every time the gospel is proclaimed. And so this is how we understand that. So might go back to that in a minute. I'll skip some of this. Oh, the 12. I did remember to do this. So the 12 things. From here came the 12 tribes, and from here came the 12 apostles. So that 12 star business is easily understood there as well. She was pregnant, crying out with birth pains and agony of giving birth. Another sign appeared in heaven. Verse 3, behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 crowns, diadems. So, great red dragon, first person of the unholy trinity is Satan himself. Satan is always referred to as the serpent, that ancient dragon, something along those lines. The color red in Revelation symbolism indicates bloodthirsty cruelty and complete evil. 7 is the number for perfection or completion. And by perfect, I don't necessarily mean perfect in virtue, perfectly good. Perfect as in this is the perfect end of it. It's the completeness of it. So 7 heads indicate your wisdom, your knowledge. So he is completely cunning, sly, and shrewd. I mean, this is the operational method of Satan. The horns in the Bible, in both Daniel and in Revelation, apocalyptic literature, indicate power, strength, might, that sort of thing. And also the early church fathers, and I like this because it makes sense, but it's not really taught much anymore, but it makes good sense, said that the horns of the dragon, his power and his might, were symbolically directed against the Decalogue, which is the 10 Commandments. So he is opposed, he uses his power against God's moral law. Now see, I read about this. Here's a book. This is an Eastern Orthodox book, and it's about the church fathers, and from the 1st and 2nd, 3rd centuries, and it's all in here. But the neat thing is that if you want to see how Satan is active in the world, and this is why it's a mystery to me that this isn't taught more. But if you want to see how he's active in the world, he's active against God's moral law. I mean, that's the thing that's being attacked the most. Surely doctrine is being attacked and all that. But if you wanted to point to one place that's almost universally attacked, it's morality. And I mean, it's attacked from every angle. And so this is a fascinating thing. So he uses his power against God's morality. And then the crowns, the word is diadem and not Stephanos. Stephanos is a crown that you win. It's, I think I've said this before, but it's what they gave. You know that silly looking laurel wreath that you always see fake Caesars wearing around their heads? That's what they would give. Actually, the Olympics have made a step up since the early, the ancient Olympics, because that's all they got for winning, a strand of leaves. And now they get gold. I'd much rather have that and their faces on Wheaties. But Stephanos is that crown. It's a victor's crown. The devil hadn't won anything. He's usurping a diadem, which is a royal crown. So he's placing himself in a seat of authority. So let's look at the verse 4. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars from heaven and cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. Now, here's an interesting thing. We talked about, I know we've talked about this. We talked about it when we talked about the 7 churches early on. We talked about this in other places when we talked about the Star of Bethlehem and whatnot. You have to be really conscious of the fact that in the Bible, star does not always mean star. The word in Greek is aster. It's where we get the the word for that pretty flower that looks like a star. It's aster. And in Revelation, 2 and following, you have the stars that represent, the leaders of the church. You have the stars that represent angels. You have stars that are actually stars. And then you have stars here that represent fallen angels. But also, harking back to the first couple of chapters of Revelation, they could represent the apostate churches and their teachers. So in one sense, it might be speaking about the casting of Satan from heaven at the beginning, when he rebelled against God and he took a third of the angels with him in rebellion against God. I think it could be both, personally. And then it could be representative of apostate churches and teachers who are false teachers, who are deceived and corrupted themselves, and who are deceiving and corrupting others. I think this also fits with almost all of the, 3 out of the 4 approaches to the end times: historic premill, dispensational premill, and amill, because all of them believe that the world will get progressively worse, and also believe that there will be a great apostasy in the church, a falling away within the church. And so I don't see any reason why both of these aren't true, because we know that it happened prior to everything, way back prehistory, and it's going to happen now. And then when that business about he was ready to devour her child, again, here the woman is both Mary and the church. Her child is both Christ and Christians. Satan, think back. So let's go back to the early life of Christ. So Christ is born in Bethlehem, and then when the Magi go to visit them, they go to Herod first, and Herod is kind of caught off guard. But Herod, who killed his sons and his wife and his mother-in-law and everybody else, because he could not stand anybody getting in his way. He didn't want to be challenged in any way. So what did Herod do? He killed all of the male babies in Jerusalem under 2 years old. So this is an instance of Satan through Herod trying to devour the child. And then this is a constant reality. The devil, you can kind of tell where you stand with Jesus in some sense, because if you are bombarded with difficulties, if you are struggling in your faith in terms of finding time to pray, going to Bible study, or going to church, and if you find yourself being more tempted than otherwise, and just having one bad situation after another, chances are most people would say, well, God doesn't love me. The fact of that matter is you're probably in good stead with God, because the devil is more after you now because he doesn't have it. It's the answer to the question of why do the wicked prosper? Well, the wicked prosper because they got help. The devil's got them. They don't, they're never, if they're tempted, big deal. They're going to give into it, right? Because they're already on his side of the struggle.
That doesn't help.
Do what?
That doesn't help.
Yeah, but the point is, Satan constantly tries to devour those who belong to Christ. He is trying to actively get us now. And of course, he will use any method or any means that he can do it. He will get us, he will try from every angle. And there's a whole lot you have to be aware of that, the Hollywood movies are largely fiction. Now, I don't deny the reality of possession or anything like that, but that's not the way the devil works 99.9% of the time. The way he works 99.9% of the time is through the television and through books and movies and music and people you work with and the government and everything else. Because that is the way that he finds interest. So anyway, we'll move on.
Mike.
Yes.
Two questions. First of all, is there any significance to the 10 horns?
Yeah, there is. The number 10. There is great significance in 10 because 10 also stands for in symbolism, in biblical symbolism. It is also a type of completion. There's some weird numbers that they also understand as completion. 7, 10, and 12 all stand for a fullness of. 40 is another one, but 40 indicates, if you'll think about the number 40, if you go all the way back to the Old Testament, think about all the things that happened in 40s, all the way up to the time of Jesus. 40 was a set period of time, a complete period of time that was used for God's testing or trial. In every case of 40s, there was always a significance to that. 10 always stood for a complete set of things. So 10 commandments, the 10 laws of God, which Jesus summarized into 2. Everything is contained in the love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. Every law of God is contained in that. So it's a complete set. And in this case, there is, in a couple of the views of the end, there is I'll use older language from the 70s, a 10-nation confederacy that will align against the powers of God. This is taken from Daniel. It's also kind of insinuated here as well, this notion of 10. Now, in the 70s, if you remember, Hal Lindsey was probably the most popular guy in the 70s. He wrote The Late Great Planet Earth and some other stuff. I don't know if he's still alive. He had a great mustache, but I don't know if he's dead or alive now. But back in the 70s, when the European Common Market was coming into power, it's now turned into the European Union. There was great fear because the European Common Market had 10 members. And so it plays into the prophecies of Daniel, of course, with the nations of the north aligning. Now, there are, historically, this 10 could be seen symbolically, not necessarily as, Germany and France and Spain and all of this. It could be seen as the set number, and this is where I fall in. I believe it's more like the set number with the parameters of those who will be aligned against God's people. So, and I'm glad you brought that up, Mark. It comes into play in just a little bit. And this is what makes it so fascinating. And I want to say this. I don't think, and I've read, and even in some of these oldest things from the early church, they acknowledge that it's impossible to completely understand apocalyptic literature of Daniel and Revelation. And so they give leeway that basically says none of us are probably completely right, but if we're trying and all generally on the same page, there's not anything to worry about. So don't feel bad if something doesn't make necessarily sense to you, or you don't necessarily buy into this but buy into the other. So this is it's kind of all kind of open. 12:6, and we'll go from there.
Mike Lindsay's alive. He's 93, lives in Houston, preached Sunday.
This is Google Jane, we call her. He preached Sunday, 93 years old.
93.
Yes, and he preached about people wearing Jesus Saved T-shirts, the price of eggs. I mean, it tells what you all.
The price of
He amazes me. I mean, that's awesome because, I looked up here a while back when we went to see David Jeremiah. I was trying to see who the oldest active preacher is, and David Jeremiah is 81, 82. John MacArthur's 85, 86, something like that. Jack Hayford was 86, 87, and he just died 2 weeks ago. He's the guy who wrote Majesty, Worship His Majesty. And he just died. And Chuck Swindoll was, I thought, until now, the oldest one, because Chuck Swindoll's like almost 88, 89. And how old is he? He's 93. Son of a gun. That's,
What you got to
how old is, look up Leighton Ford in just a minute.
Leighton who?
Leighton Ford. Leighton. That's Billy Graham's brother-in-law.
So you got some years to look forward to.
Yeah, you got a long way to go.
So that's good. All right. So, let me see.
He's 91.
91. Oh, well, Lindsay beats him.
Yep.
All right. The woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God. I didn't write this down. I was just going to bring it up. But if you remember, Mary, where did Mary go with baby Jesus? Where did they go? Joseph and Mary took Jesus and fled into Egypt. Of course, that was to fulfill some prophecy as well. Out of Egypt I have called my son. But the other thing is the wilderness is always seen as the place of desolation, hardship, and trial. So symbolically, again, it is that. I mean, literally it's that. I don't know, have you ever been in the wilderness? It ain't very, it's not Holiday Inn. So the church has been in the wilderness for 2,000 years because the church has, been under trial and persecution for all that time. So whoa, Marty. I thought I had that turned, I think I just turned it up when I was looking. Verse 7, now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, and he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Again, three ways to look at this. Two literal and one symbolic. The war in heaven, the first casting out of Satan. The defeat is when Satan was defeated on the cross. And people will say, if he was defeated on the cross, how is it that it's still going on? I'll give you two examples. One's a little bit more maybe politically incorrect than the other. But the first one, I've always been fascinated about the guy who, it was in the 1970s when they found this fellow. This Japanese Japanese soldier who was still fighting World War II 30 years after World War II was gone. Nobody told him it was over. And he was on that island by himself, and he was defending that sucker from everybody. So it's possible, it's entirely possible to fight a fight that's over. But if you will look, both sides of Roe versus Wade was settled by the Supreme Court, so the fight was technically over, but the opponents of Roe v. Wade fought it until it was overturned. Now, the fight's over again, but the opponents of the overturn are still fighting. So you can fight after the battle, after you've been defeated. So this is the way to look at that. Satan is defeated, and he's eternally defeated. It's just that time has not come to an end, so he's still got time to take some people down with him. Misery loves company, kind of thing. And then the very symbolic, I don't know if I want to call it that way, metaphorical way to look at it is that when every time a soul is saved, again, let's go back to World War II. Let's go back to the Pacific War. Every time MacArthur or Nimitz took an island, when they took back the Philippines, when they took Guadalcanal, when they took Midway, when they took Iwo Jima, it was taking back the enemy's territory for the side of good. And in this case, taking what belongs to Satan and making it belong to Christ and the kingdom. So Satan is defeated in the soul of everybody who is saved. And then let's go down to 13 and look. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished, maybe nervous too, nourished for a time and times and half a time. That time and half a time's businesses. It always throws us off. But persecuted the woman. This is the unceasing persecution of the church. There's never been a time in the history of the world where the true church hasn't been persecuted. Now you might say, well, let's take a look at the 1400s. Nobody was opposed to the Roman Catholic Church. It was true, but they were corrupt. Let's take a look at the 1700s Church of England. Nobody was persecuting the English church. True, but it was dead. That's why Wesley revived it. You can just continue to go. But wherever there were true Christians, it's being persecuted. And you can see that today, really around the world now. And it doesn't have to be so much in an established church now as it is true Christians inside those established churches. You see it in America as churches are persecuted. You saw it in Canada big time when that pastor, y'all remember that pastor that got arrested for preaching outside during COVID, and he was locked up for almost a year. Just last week, a Roman Catholic priest was convicted for not doing a thing out loud. He was on his knees praying in front of an abortion place. He was arrested and he was sentenced Monday to several years in prison. So you see, and you also see how people are being called nuts and bolts and everything else by those who are opposed to the church. The business of 3.5 years, that's what times and half time or whatever is 3.5 years. 3.5 is half of 7. 7 is in one understanding of this, the duration of the tribulation. Very well certainly could be the complete time, whether it's 7 years literally or 7 years as the duration of time that God wants it to be. I could flip a coin on that. But 3.5 signifies that this won't last forever. It's a short period of time. Let's go to 15 and 16. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Now this is just real simple. Water from his mouth is the multitude of demonic opponents, false prophets, false teachers, heretical teachings, deceptions, temptations, corruptions to deceive the church and lead Christians astray. Now, I'll get that in a minute. See, we understand this in a very real way right now, and I think this is indicative of where we are. False prophets, false teachers. False teachers, in a way, are regurgitating what the false prophets say. Because a false prophet claims to speak for God. And you hear people say that, this is the proper way. God didn't really mean this when he said, by the way, people don't realize when they say that, that's exactly what the serpent said to Eve. God really didn't say that, did he? That's a problem right there. But a false teacher will pick up what the false prophet has said and pass it along to people who aren't any the wiser. And then the deceptions. Somebody's bad to the bone.
Sorry.
That's like B.B. King in there. So deceptions. Satan is a liar and a deceiver, and the notion here is to twist what is true, and to make you think that if you can just twist a little bit of it to make it a tiny bit incorrect, he's got you. Because and I tell people this all the time. I don't always understand the Bible, and I've been studying it for I don't know how many years, but officially studying it at least for 30-something years. With regards to seminary and all that, I don't understand everything it says, and to tell you the truth, I don't know if I know. Well, I'm sure I don't know everything it says, because you have to study and study and study to get it. But I can tell you this: I believe everything it says, whether I know what it says or not. The great deception of the church right now, in the church right now, are those who are claiming to be leaders of the church, and this happens all over the place, who claim that this isn't true, or you don't have to acknowledge that, you don't have to go by this, you don't have to believe that, or what have you. That's just flat deception. And this is why the Bible also says not many of you should become teachers, because teachers, people who proclaim the Scriptures and try to teach the Scriptures and preach the Scriptures will be judged on a higher level. So it's fire you're playing with if you do that. But deception can creep in, and it's not, I shared some stuff about the United Methodist Church Sunday, but it's not only us. Andy Stanley, Charles's son, who is a big preacher in his own right, Southern Baptist, said some stuff this past weekend that has blown up the Twitterverse and everything else, because every Southern Baptist under the sun is going after him, and Presbyterians and others, because he basically said some stuff that wasn't true, and I'll leave it at that. But he sounds more like, let me just put it this way so you'll know what context. He sounds more like a Methodist bishop these days than a Baptist preacher. So, and I don't know what, Charles is in his close to 90, but I can't imagine that Daddy is happy with son in this regard. So, you know, you've got that going on. Temptations, people are tempted by all sorts of things. The church is tempted by all sorts of things, and corruption. If you don't think that corruption can't happen in the church, you haven't been paying attention. And people will say, well, I don't want to go to church because it's corrupt. Well, it is corrupt. Don't say no, it's not. Say yes, it is. But we're all sinners saved by grace, and we are. Luther wrote something, and it was sort of his motto, and it was "Simul Justus et peccator," and that is "Simul Justus et peccator," and it means simultaneously saved and a sinner, simultaneously justified and yet a sinner. So Luther didn't claim that we were benighted saints when we were, because we still struggle. We still have to confess. We still have to overcome temptation and all that. But the problem is we don't always achieve that, and the church can be very corrupt. It also fascinates me that this is not. It doesn't fascinate me. I'm not surprised. Let me take that back. I'm not surprised. This has not been in the American press yet. But on Monday, Pope Benedict's last edict was to print a book, his last book, after his death, and he says in the book that he did not want it printed while he was alive because he didn't want to blah, blah, blah. He just lays out Francis and the corruption in the Catholic Church. It's not printed in English or German, and he lays out the German church and the German bishops who are highly liberal. It's only in Italian right now, and the only way you can know about it is to go to European press agencies, and it's all storming all over European stuff, but the American press hadn't picked it up. They don't want to pick it up.
They don't want
because he goes after the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops as well. And so, you know, he exposes corruption. I mean, here's the head of the Roman Catholic Church saying the church is corrupt. I mean, it's not like we didn't know that, and I'm not picking on the Catholics. It's not like we don't know our own church is corrupt. But this is a tool of Satan. We certainly are striving not to be corrupt, but Satan tempts in such a way that corruption becomes like, yeah, money, power, fame. Look at all the big, and I'll get off of this in a minute, but look at all the big, and it can happen to small people too, small, you know, insignificant creatures like me, but if you look at Bill Hybels wrote the book, literally wrote the book on church growth, and then Bill Hybels gets caught in an awkward, situation, in a sinful situation, and loses it all. And all sorts of other people do the same thing. Jimmy Swaggart, Jim Baker, and all those other people. So 17. Let's go to 17. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring on those who kept the commandments of God, hold the testimony of Jesus. Went to make war. Satan will wage war against the church, against Christians, with an ever-increasing degree of intensity until the end. And at the end, he will initiate the coming of the unholy Trinity. So let's take a look at that, the other two people, or the other two figures of the unholy Trinity in chapter 13.
Can I ask a quick question? At the very end of verse 17, it says, it states that, and he stood on the sand of the sea. The sand of the sea, that seems to have some significance, doesn't it, with water and we see being symbolic in Revelations?
Yeah, know, I'll be honest with you, I didn't find anything that any commentator said anything about that. Except that, you know, if you take symbolism, and you see what is next, that the beast comes out of the sea. Explain that. I'll explain that in a minute. But the sea also represents chaos and upheaval. So this notion of him standing there on the shore with the sea, because you know in heaven later on in Revelation, the sea is no more, because the sea you know represents. There's a let me show it. Remind me not to do what I did last time. Oh, there's a thing right there. One time last fall, some of y'all didn't tell me, and I did this with my hand and then rubbed my head, and I looked like a smurf. So there is a deity in the Old Testament called Yam. It's not Yam, not like candied yams. It's Yam, and Yam is the god of chaos, the god of the sea. And so, you know, there's a couple of ways to understand Yam, Babylonian god. But so, when God created order out of chaos, there's one way to understand how God is more powerful than anything else. But the other thing that's significant is the story of Jesus walking on the water. The story of Jesus, you know, many people say, well, that's a great trick, but does it have any theological significance apart from Peter? It has great theological significance, because the Bible says that Jesus will make his enemies his footstool. So to put your foot on something means you have power over them and you've conquered them. So Jesus walking on the water is effectively Jesus walking, subduing chaos, subduing false gods. He's more powerful. So that goes to the sea thing. So look at 13, verse 1. Let me go to 13. You need to do. I got to figure out. I have to get out of this until all the way back. I can't flip a page. I saw a beast rising out of the sea, 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems on its horns, and a blasphemous name, and blasphemous names on its head. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave his power and gave his, and to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. Well, let me just say this. This is the Antichrist. So this is the second person of the Trinity, the unholy Trinity. Out of the sea is a reference not to so much to chaos per se, but to a sort of a state of sinfulness, but also to the sea of humanity. Now tie those two together. All of humanity is sin. So this person, this beast, will come out of the sinful sea, or chaotic sea of humanity. So if you're a premillennial, dispensational if you're a dispensational premillennialist, you see the Antichrist almost entirely as a literal figure. If you're an amillennialist and an historic premillennialist, you'll see the Antichrist both as a historical figure, but also as a spirit that pervades the world. So there's that, but he is and I fall into that camp on because I believe the Bible supports the spirit of Antichrist. John speaks of the spirit of Antichrist. Let me do this. So anti means against. So antifreeze is against the freeze. But it also means instead of. Some people are calling, I think it's wrong, but they don't like it. I don't care about it either, but it's not my ball game. But some people are calling Pope Francis an anti-pope. In history, there were anti-popes, and while there was a pope in Rome, there was a pope in Avignon, France, and they were called anti-popes. Not because they were against the pope, because they were in place of the pope. So the Antichrist is both against Christ, and he sets himself up to be in place of Christ. So, Mark, this is where, I got the wrong thing. This is where your question about the 10 came up. The heads and horns and crowns, you go back up to what I talked about, the dragon. But also the 10 horns are that collective of 10 nations or 10 princes, which also mean if you see prince or king in the Bible, they didn't know anything of presidents and premiers and prime ministers. So if you ever see prince or king, that means ruler. So this could be either 10 literal or the collective fullness of 10 nations or 10 rulers who will be opposed to Christ, who will be under his spell. See, this is the political leader. Satan is the puppet master. The Antichrist, the beast, is the political leader. And then 13:11, I keep picking that book up like I'm going to read out of it. 13:11 through 13. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and the inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to the earth in front of people. Just leave it right there for a minute. This is the false prophet, the last one. If the Antichrist is the political leader, the false prophet is the religious leader. Now, the interesting note here, I left off the leopard stuff. Well, let me go back to Antichrist. I'm sorry, I left off the leopard business. Leopard, bear, and lion. He has the qualities of a wild beast. So this is a person that's vicious, but without a conscience. He's amoral. If you're in the woods and Tip goes up there with these vicious things, if you go up there, if you go up in the Pacific Northwest or somewhere up towards Canada and a grizzly bear eats you can't blame the grizzly bear. He's not being mean. He's not being immoral. It's the nature of a bear to eat you. Same thing with a leopard and a lion and those sorts of things. Did you see the fireman in New York City yesterday in Harlem that was climbing the ladder at a building that was on fire and came face to face with a 400-pound Bengal tiger looking out the window? Somebody had a tiger in their apartment. So anyway, he has blasphemous names. This just displays his open contempt and rejection of all things holy, particularly Christ. For instance, in the Chinese church, in the ones the government allows, which you have to just remain, skeptical about that anyway. But last year, Xi Jinping came in the church. Now they've taken the crosses off top of the church. It's bad enough, but they did allow pictures, icons of Jesus inside the church. He came in and took down all of those pictures of Jesus and replaced them with a picture of himself.
Jeez.
So, I don't think that's necessarily the abomination of desolation, but it is the height of contempt. It just shows, I don't respect this place at all. I'm going to show you who's the boss. And so it will be like that. You see these people. I remember, it's been back in the 90s. Some of you might remember this. Sinead O'Connor was on Saturday Night Live and tore the picture of Pope John Paul II live on TV, just tore it up as part of her act. You see this, people do blasphemous things in all sorts of it. It's kind of like, I'll get to that later. But so go back down to the third beast. The word beast here is therion or thorion in Greek, and it means to have a truly beastly nature. And in this sense, he is not as, and it's not to say that the Antichrist is amoral. I don't want you to get that, but a wild beast is amoral. It just doesn't care. But this one is corruptly wicked in the sense that he has this beastly nature, and the fact that he comes out of the earth as opposed to the sea, to be earthbound, earthly, is in symbol. All his feelings and desires and conceptions are earthly. That is sensuous, wicked, and sinful. So this guy is just filled with gunk. But he has two horns like a lamb. He is pretending to be Jesus, or to represent Jesus. But he really is literally the wolf in sheep's clothing, because he is inherently wicked and sinful and sensuous and all of that. He has a beastly nature, and that's not Jesus. Down to 16, 17. Also, it causes. Let's go to 15. So that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also, it causes all, both great and small, rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or on the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding, calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So, a mark, in this case, signifies ownership. The mark of the beast would then signify his ownership of you, like a brand on a slave or cattle. Christians have a mark. Now, we have a mark now, and we have a mark that will come later. But the Bible says that when we are baptized, we are marked as belonging to Christ. So we have that mark. This is some sort of a different mark. This mark denotes allegiance, devotion, worship, submission to the Antichrist. To have the mark on your hand equals your deeds are marked. To have it on your forehead is to denote your knowledge is marked. They are marked then as belonging, the person with this mark is belonging wholly to the Antichrist in thought, word, and deed. So you're not part in, to use the Clemson slogan, you're all in here. Won't be able to buy or sell. This is economic and social boycott of believers. I know we got to go, but this could be harassment, it could be refusal,
Censorship.
it could be censorship, it could be any of these things. 666, this is one that everybody agrees on. That people have tried since the beginning to figure out who 666 is. It's impossible. Plus, Jesus says, don't try to figure this stuff out in that way, so that you'll. But in the biblical number system, 6 is the number of humanity or man. It's also the number of imperfection. If 7 is perfection, 6 is one less. So 666 is complete imperfection, complete corruption. So it's not good, whatever it is. I wanted to get to talking to you just a bit, but we don't have time. So I guess I have to bring this up, but about the one world government and one world religion. Because it plays into this, and these two people, because they're people, particularly. So I guess we have to do that next week. It whets your appetite. We will get there, and if you have questions, I promise I'll do that. But if you have questions, email them to me, and I'll get to as much as possible. So. I think that's all. Y'all got any quick questions?
Do you think that the Antichrist and the false prophet, instead of being a person, like an individual person, could be a group or, a party or a movement? No. And I'll tell you why. Every party and every movement has to have a leader. Okay.
So I think the party, the movement stuff sticks with the spirit of them, but I think. And I think this indicates a person. You can say communism or Nazism, but you don't have communism without Lenin and Stalin and Marx. You don't have Nazism without Hitler, and all that. So you got to have some nut at the top. So, all right.
Thank you.